Hello and welcome to Unacademy. I welcome you all to the Hindu analysis session. Very important announcements for you. Over and above that, Conquer Prelims is starting tomorrow. Now, before we begin, the 50% off plus 6 months offer is going to end on 13th of February. It is extremely important that you become a part of this session and become part of our family. Use the code IAS English to get this discount further. It is important that you use the code IAS English because that will attribute us to your to our team. Therefore, the mentorship program which is promised within it will only come through if you use the code IAS English. So using the code IAS English is extremely important. Thereafter, Conquer Prelims is starting tomorrow. We'll be discussing all static topics through questions, and therefore on 10th February join Chetan sir with regards to IR, Geography, Polity. Thereafter, we have Art and Culture, Modern India, and all other subjects which are important for the UPSC examination will be covered. So subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon. Now, you will find the PPT or the PDF of this session in this Telegram channel. Just scan this, you will get it. Now, let's look at the topics we are going to cover today. The first one is with regards to the trade war which Trump has started. The whole newspaper was filled with news related to the Delhi elections itself. That is irrelevant to us as of right now as a UPSC aspirant. Therefore, we will now concentrate on the Trump trade wars. What is the implication of that? Further, we will discuss what is the difference between a freebie and a welfare scheme, because this has been a very important deciding factor in the Delhi election itself. Then we'll talk about private investment. A very interesting conversation is going on with regards to what do we do about private investment. Then two topics related to USAID. Trump is basically dominating this news also, but he's basically slashed the budget of USAID by 90%. Then we'll talk about a very important national mission on manuscripts. Its name may be changed and the authority may be also changed. And last but not the least, we will discuss a very interesting scientific fact, how climate change is leading to the soil actually emitting more carbon dioxide also. Now, the idea is very simple. We have GS paper 2, 3, 4 mixed up together along with GS paper 1 and something related to prelims. What we will do is we'll go into the details, and wherever we need to go to a higher level of understanding, I'll add in the details. Good morning to all of you. I hope you all are now comfortable and we can begin our conversation. The first topic which we are going to deal with is with regards to the Trump trade wars which he started. Now, we already know that Trump has pushed in 25% of tariff on Canada and Mexico, 10% on Canadian energy, and over and above that, 10% of a tariff on China. Now, this was something which Trump had promised within his election campaign, in his election speech itself, which was to tax the Canadian, Mexican, and the Chinese authority. We'll try to understand why is there a perception negative against these two countries or these three countries, and what is this crisis related to. Now, trade tariffs are generally related to or used in economic terms to balance trade. For example, if a country has a pure comparative advantage over a separate country itself, or A and B are trading and B has a comparative advantage, generally it is believed that in order to balance B, you will put in some tariff. Tariff is to balance trade, but also protect your domestic industries. So if Trump was doing this on these two grounds, which is protecting domestic manufacturers or trying to balance trade with China or any of these countries, then it would have made sense. The question which we have to understand is that, is it actually balancing, or is it based on rather big politics and the politics of this of that continent itself? Now, here, if you ask Trump, what is the reason why you are putting tariff on these two countries or these three countries, the answer which he or she or his administration is actually giving is that we are trying to address a national emergency. That national emergency is actually related to what is called as fentanyl. Fentanyl is an opioid. I'll have a discussion with regards to this. But he is saying that these two countries, Mexico and Canada, are allowing fentanyl or criminals or drug cartels to use these porous borders to push in fentanyl opioids into the American sector, which is in turn leading to the Americans becoming drug addicts, and opioid crisis is getting more and more exaggerated. What do I mean by the opioid crisis? Just give me 1 second, I will explain it to you. But the point is, he is using the concept of national emergency. What he does not realize is, by using this rhetoric, he is also going to get retaliatory tariffs. Meaning, this is not going to be a straightforward concept that I am going to bully Canada and Mexico. Mexico, specifically China, will not respond. That is not the case, because China has already responded. Mexico and Canada will also respond. And this is where the cascading effect is going to be. His own people, with regards to this tit for tat politics, is in turn going to increase the prices. His own people, Americans, are going to pay more for the same things which were coming from different sectors. And therefore, let's be very honest about this. A tariff war is not the need of the hour with a global slowdown, with Russia, Ukraine, with the global headwinds which was needed. Trump is not understanding that it is not a straightforward, what we call as, I'm going to bully you understanding. Because if he does that, he is going to create more issues for Americans only. Now, what do I mean by this fentanyl concept? What is the importance of fentanyl? See, in America, as of right now, other than cocaine, for example, coke, or other forms of crack, which is basically all of these are different forms of what we call as drugs, the Americans have overused their prescribed painkillers, and fentanyl is one of the most accessible, but one of the most overused and overdosed drug also. Meaning, if you look at 2013 and 2022, the deaths related to what we call as fentanyl poisoning or fentanyl overdose has doubled or tripled, and in certain cases it is addicted, people are addicted to fentanyl more than even heroin and other drugs in that regard. Because it is a over-the-counter drug, it can be in a way accessed easily. People are selling fentanyl, and more than that, what Trump argues is Mexicans are pushing fentanyl through the southern border, and now he has also created a certain understanding that the Canadians are conniving with the Mexican cartels, and there's a fentanyl plant which has been set up in Canada, and through Canada, which is much more porous than the Mexican border, more and more fentanyl is coming from the north. Now, this is where there's a perception problem, and that perception problem is this. When the Americans were asked who is responsible for the fentanyl opioid crisis, the answer first is obviously drug dealers. That is okay. That is obviously the case. But see what they're saying. Mexico, China. The US federal government is coming on 4th number. Thereafter, the pharmaceutical companies, the people who are addicted, and doctors last. What is interesting is China has actually nothing to do with fentanyl. China has a very proper trade surplus with America. China is not the one who's pushing fentanyl. It is actually a Mexican cartels and the overuse and over prescription of fentanyl, and it's a more an American issue. There are multiple American cities where people are dealing with drug abuse, and that is because of their own system. So somehow the perception has come through that China is the one who has directed the Mexicans and the Canadians, and they are basically created a trio and they're drugging the Americans. It's quite ironic that the British did the same to the Chinese with regards to opium and how the opium wars happened. It's very interestingly full circle with regards to history itself. But China's involvement is based on rhetoric more than anything, which again is not properly coming through, and Trump is basically working on this rhetoric that his own constituency is saying that it is because of China, it is because of Mexico and Canada. So let's try to do something like this. So therefore, the basic premise on which this tariff is based is rather rhetoric than data, and is more systemic to America than actually coming from North and South. So when you get a question, for example, on what is the need or what is the concept behind this tariff war, it is national security. But this is where you also have to understand this triangulation which is getting developed, where they're saying that Mexico, Canada, and China are related to this fentanyl crisis in that regard. And they're also arguing that Mexico has developed a certain, you can say, plant in Canada itself, and using the Canadian border, they are pushing in more and more drugs into America. This is purely based on a certain rhetoric. There is a certain pact, US, Canada, Mexico pact as it is called, which ensures free trade between these three countries. However, these three countries' free trade, which is Mexico, US, Canada, he is ignoring that also. Somehow China is linked to this concept, which it shouldn't with regards to fentanyl, but it's again based on rhetoric. So what I've tried to establish till this point is a very simple concept, which is that what is the trade barrier or trade wars which have started? US pushing in tariffs against Canada, China, and Mexico. What is it based on? Fentanyl crisis. Fentanyl is the name of a medication which is given for as a painkiller to people. In America, as of right now, there is a pure crisis on fentanyl overuse. Basically, think of it like this, that you are overdosing on paracetamol. That is the idea here. So they are overusing that. The idea is the fentanyl is pushing or is pushed through the southern and the northern borders. Therefore, they are creating this, you can say, understanding that Mexico and Canada are together in this. This is where Trump, as I said to you, is very simply using this type of data, where people's perception is important rather than the real solid data which is coming through. Trump is trying to bring these two countries to the negotiating table. That has already come through. Canada does not actually have a trade surplus with America. Neither does the Mexican what we call as government have a trade surplus with US. US actually has a trade surplus with these two countries. But this is where the Trudeau versus Trump angle comes through, where there's a certain ego clash. But the idea is cartel-based drug insurgency, or if you want to call it cartel-based drug push into the Canadian sector, then into the American sector, is something as a concept. What is interesting is there is no proof that Mexican cartels have created certain institutions in Canada which are producing fentanyl for the Mexicans and pushing it to America. So I hope you understand that this is a people's perception based idea. His constituency says China, therefore he's saying China. Now what has happened is, as soon as these tariff barriers have been pushed, Canada and Trump have come to a certain understanding, and even Mexico and Canada both have come to the negotiating table, where Trump has said, I'm going to delay this by 1 week because the Mexican president has said, we will push in 10,000 National Guards on the Mexican border to stop illegal immigration into America. And with regards to Canada, there is an idea that we will work together to remove the czars of the Mexican cartel which are operating from Mexico. So, and operating from Canada. So the idea is, this is based on rhetoric. So they're using rhetoric. The idea is very simple, that the basic premise here is immigrants are criminals. They bring in drugs with them. These drugs are coming from Canada and Mexico. Therefore, control these two borders. This is the loop he has created. So before we look at the question which can come from this area, let's try to understand this concept, because trade wars is going to be a standard thing, because he's considering about EU. He's already considering multiple West Asian countries, which is going to push us tariff. As I said, and I'm repeating myself with regards to giving you a summary, tariffs are generally used to balance trade, be it trade-based imbalance in import-export, or be it with regard to protect your own industries. The idea is that this will help American manufacturers and give them employment opportunities in that regard. But that is not actually true, because the way it is getting connected, it will not happen. What these tariffs have been pushed in as a national security, national emergency, and that emergency he is quoting as two. which is immigration and fentanyl crisis. Immigration is based on the fact that people are entering from the southern and northern borders. They are criminals. They are the ones who are aliens. And on the other hand, you have the concept of national emergency, second aspect, which is fentanyl crisis. These men and women also bring with them drugs. Now, together, this national emergency issue is now being blown out of proportion. Canada and Mexico have already, in a way, shown a conciliatory attitude because both are neighboring countries in that regard. And therefore, therein, they have come to the negotiating table. But what China has done is very important. Before I discuss that, are we on the same page with regards to this? Fentanyl crisis, national emergency, the concept of a certain rhetoric which is there, and he's using people's perception to tariff these countries rather than balancing. Perfect. Now, China is not a neighboring country. China doesn't care of immediate retaliation. So what the Chinese have done is that they have now said that this is not a joke. This is not a joke that you push in 10% tariff on us. So what the Chinese have done is that they've retaliated with 15% tariff on American pharmaceutical imports, on American coal, LNG, and any form of agricultural, you can say, equipment and cars. Further, what they've done is they have pushed an antitrust proceeding, and that too against Google. They said, we are now going to prosecute Google in a Chinese court for antitrust, which is this monopolistic behavior which it has. Further, it has done one more thing. It has pushed multiple US fashion and biotechnology brands into the non or unreliable list. Therefore, now Trump is seeing what happens when you throw a stone into mud. He threw this stone into the Chinese sector by saying 10% tariff, and now what has come through is 15% antitrust proceeding in China, plus over and above that, the idea of now most of the US fashion and biotechnology companies being put into unreliable list, so their funding will be in a way stopped. This is the problem. This is why people are saying it is an unnecessary trade war. It's an unnecessary trade war because actually China has nothing to do with the fentanyl crisis. It may be that it may be funding the cartels, but that is a larger understanding. But it is actually Mexico and Mexican cartels which are doing, and this is systemic to the Americans. Americans' drug use behavior is such that it is leading to a fentanyl crisis. Now, this is where you have to understand that this topic will keep on growing, and it is based on a rhetoric of understanding. Trump just listens to his constituency and tries to act. This is problematic. And the way UPSC will ask you a question is, Trump's trade war with its neighbors may mushroom into a crisis in the global supply chain. This is a very interesting question because this question then establishes a certain connection between Trump's behavior and the global supply chain. If Trump is going to be so finicky and he's weaponizing tariffs, then the whole world can do that. This will push us back to the Cold War era, where in Cold War politics, tariffs were used as a way of a deterrence, as a way of punishment. So I hope you are all sorted with regards to this topic. Simple, straightforward FAQ section, you will only find it in the Delhi newspaper or in the international edition, not in other places. Mushroom means it's going to become bigger. It's going to become bigger. Okay, right. Moving on. Moving on to something which is directly related to what is happening in Delhi. In the Delhi elections, there was a certain, you can say, a certain understanding which developed between the different parties, or you can say there was a race to win that war, you can say, understanding, which is who is going to give bigger freebies in that regard. Now, this is where this article points out is what is the difference between a freebie and a welfare scheme, because not everything which the government gives you is a freebie, and not every freebie is a welfare scheme, or not every welfare scheme is a freebie. So therein we have to define what is the difference. The context is very simple. The context is when AAP argued that we are going to give 2100 rupees, 2100 rupees as a monthly allowance to women and 21,000 for pregnant women and LPG cylinder at 500 rupees. BJP very quickly responded by saying, we'll give you 2500 rupees per month. Further, we will also give you free electricity and we will also help you set up solar initiative. This is where there was a certain race. In that regard, the idea was who will give bigger concessions or freebies is a big question in that regard. Now, this is where I have to define to you how do I call something a freebie and how do I call something a welfare scheme. Very, very important concept which is fundamental to this understanding and come because of the idea of freebies being so important in winning elections. It can come in the examination easily and there are certain nuances which you have to understand in order to differentiate the two. Now let's try to understand that. See, the core issue here is, be it the academic community, be it economists, they're not able to draw a line on what constitutes a freebie and what constitutes a certain welfare scheme. Now, the idea is people say that freebies are bad because that is like bribing the voter to get something. But welfare schemes are better because they are more systemic. Now, herein lies the problem. How you define it is a matter of perception. For example, I'll tell you, you give free access to lower income families in DTC buses, which is no ticket needed for, you can say, less than 2 lakhs income, everybody can travel free. Now you will say that it is a freebie because for you and me, using the metro or using the car or our scooter or whatever we use, which is motorcycle, is considered to be viable. However, we say it as a freebie, but for low income groups, it becomes a certain boon, which is it becomes a welfare scheme. Further, because there is no cost of actually traveling, you will then, the same labor which is traveling for free will be then available in the market at a lower wage. Therefore, you are also benefited out of that freebie. So the question is, be it cash transfer or be it a scheme, how you look at it defines it as a freebie or a welfare scheme. You may not be affected by it, so therefore you call it a freebie. But for someone it is extremely critical, it becomes a certain concept of a welfare scheme. So this is where we need to understand how we define it, and for the examination it becomes very, very important. Now, in order to do that, see, there's an institutionalization of certain transfers as non-freebies. For example, the National Food Security Act, which was brought in by the UPA, makes midday meals, PDS, or even basic child development services as a legal prerogative. In that case, with 800 million people in India getting free food, free ration, and other forms of services, we never call this as a freebie. So the point was that the Center for Financial Exclusion argued that by giving cash transfers to the household, specifically the women, allows for the household to go forward and also empowers the women. Further, it also empowers the household and stops domestic violence from happening. This is the argument which was given by the Center for Financial Inclusion. So the idea is very simple. There is enough precedence to say that cash transfer per se is not bad. So what I'm trying to establish to you is, elections are now working on freebies. This word is being used very freely. Center for Financial Inclusion says that cash transfers to women in the household is good for the household, for the women, and for also violence within patriarchy itself. There is enough precedence to say that the government of India recognizes certain forms of DBT, cash transfer, and ration as non-freebie. Then how do you and me then define a freebie and the concept of what we call as a welfare scheme? Do we understand the concept here? I've pushed in this 10 minutes to make you understand a systemic issue, which is the core conceptual issue. All cash transfers are not bad. All cash transfers are not bad. All forms of subsidies are not bad. Therefore, not every freebie is a welfare scheme. Not every welfare scheme is a freebie. So then how do I define it? This is where we are going to use the capacity approach of no one else but Amartya Sen. This is also used by the Niti Aayog and multiple other forums to say that how you define a freebie and a welfare scheme is based on capacity building. For example, if a scheme leads to human and household capacity building, then it is not a freebie, rather it is a welfare measure. What do I mean by capacity? It could be in the form of labor capacity. It could be the form of productivity. It could be in the form of freedom, freedom, empowerment of women. If it allows for capacity building, then it in turn can lead to the understanding of your capacity to go forward. Therefore, it is not a freebie. Now, let's take an example. You have the midday meal setup. I'm going to ask you this question. Is midday meals is this scheme a freebie or a welfare scheme based on this understanding? Come on, tell me. Based on this understanding, is this a freebie or is this a certain welfare scheme? If I have defined it as a concept of capacity building, very good. It is a welfare scheme. It is a welfare scheme for a very specific reason, because midday meals are related to nutrition. If you are pushing money for nutrition, you will then also have a better impact on immunity plus health. And this has impact in two ways. First, it reduces the load on the public health system. And further, at the same point of time, it also allows for better human resource. Because if you and me are actually having no form of malnutrition, stunting or wasting, we are a better human resource for India itself. Therefore, Amartya Sen's understanding of capacity approach is very, very relevant in defining what is a freebie. Therefore, any scheme, PDS, the concept of midday meals, the Ayushman Bharat program, the Indradhanush program, immunization, these are good schemes, not freebies. These are welfare schemes, not freebies, because they have a long-term impact. A very important word, a long-term impact on human and what we call as basic resources of the labor market, which is nutrition, the concept of family wealth and healthcare, and the idea of how you can make the household more self-sufficient. So therefore, nutrition is something which is important, and therefore you have to understand this. Now, an example of a freebie, for example, let's take this same scheme as a concept. Let's take an example as a freebie of a certain tiffin system which has started by Delhi government. For example, AAP sets up a certain rasoi in which you get food for 10 rupees, which could have cost 90 rupees. Now that is a pure freebie, because as much as labor class or lower strata people will go and eat in that tiffin center or in that restaurant, can you stop anyone who is above a certain above a certain, you can say, income group to not eat there? And the answer is no. Therefore, in Delhi, there was a case in which the food which was allocated via the PDS system into these rasois, it should have gone into the rain, you can say, affected people, or what we call as homeless houses. That food was actually eaten by people on the streets, and the vendors sold that. It should have been sold at 10 rupees, it was sold at 50 rupees. Still very, very cheap. That is where the concept of freebie comes in. Freebies have short-term impact. They are more to appease people, and they don't really go for targeted welfare. Understand this point. Targeted welfare is a very important concept. For example, I'll give you a very, again, simple, very straightforward example. Women being given access to the bus free of cost, no questions asked, is a freebie. Why? Because household income, where does the woman come from, and what is her context matters. Because if everybody is going to use it, then certain people who can afford it will still use it and misuse it. So welfare and freebie, the differentiating factor is how do you target the people. Now this is where there is a very interesting aspect which has been talked about in that case. Because freebies are short term, they have an impact on the state health of finances also. Meaning, PDS system, be it DBT, be it cash transfers to farmers, has been happening for decades now in India. However, in none of the cases, you have ever seen this concept that the input is not worth the output. Meaning, I think there has been no report, be it the Planning Commission or the Niti Aayog, which says cash transfer from the government to the farmer has in turn led to the fiscal deficit of India to go up. I think we all can understand that. There has been no such report which says DBT, electricity subsidy, or any other form of subsidy which is given to a farmer has in turn led to the revenue deficit or the fiscal deficit to go up. Because whatever input has gone into the agriculture sector has come out as an output and has allowed the agriculture sector to have positive growth for year on year. This is where the article gives you a very interesting example of Delhi. And this is one of the reasons why the AAP was not able to control the rhetoric also. Delhi under AAP had reported in 2022-23 that it had a revenue surplus of 14,000 crores. Then it went into a certain spending spree with regards to freebies. And this figure was lowered by 5,000 crores, a deficit of 13.9% decline. Further, by 2024-25, the projected surplus stands at 3,000 crores, wherein a 35% drop year on year. So imagine from 14,000 crores, the AAP government through its schemes, whatever it may be it perception based, be it understanding, has burnt close to 11,000 crores. 11,000 crores were burnt in the freebie, you can say, scheme based understanding. And this is where freebies are increasing the revenue deficit of the state. It is affecting the GDP of the state, and the fiscal prudence of that, or the fiscal, you can say, discipline of that state is getting affected. The cost of a freebie is close to 10 to 12,000 crores. And if the state is bigger, this amount is bigger. This is where, imagine 11,000 crores would have gone into welfare schemes, which in turn would have led to a certain form of human resource development in Delhi, more jobs in Delhi. Then it would have come through as a certain return on investment. See, there are two ways in which you can understand this. A freebie does not always give you return on investment. There's no ROI in freebies. A welfare scheme mostly gives you either human resource, either gives you output or some form of income. So it is a complicated issue, but I hope now you have understanding what is the difference between a freebie and a welfare scheme. Capacity building is welfare. Short-term appeasement is what we today call as a freebie. And therefore, even the Supreme Court has said that we will not intervene in this. It is the responsibility of the legislation or the legislative branch to decide how do they do electoral politics. They will not intervene into elections. This is where, be it Karnataka, be it Maharashtra, be it Jharkhand, be it Delhi, there's a certain trend which is going on. And that trend is just before the elections, talk about a lot of freebies. After elections, quoting revenue deficit, change them into either welfare schemes or totally disband them. This is where you and me have to be educated more. The people of this country have to be educated more in order to distinguish between a freebie and a welfare scheme. I hope this makes sense, and therefore you can always get this type of question. Welfare schemes and freebies are the two faces of the same coin. Comment. This is a neutral question. This is a neutral question, but you can also get a positive or a negative question where it can say freebies are bad, it can say freebies are necessary. Everywhere you will do one thing, and you should note this very well, and very importantly, you have to use the perception concept. Always say that yes, a freebie is a welfare scheme for some and a welfare scheme is a freebie for some. However, we have to use a litmus test. And that litmus test is capacity building, long-term development, return on investment, and human resource and capacity building in the state itself. Use these big words and you'll be sorted. Sorted? Two topics we've done. One regards to trade wars and the other one related to the concept of what we today call as freebie versus, with Delhi elections coming to a close, it makes sense to understand these two differentiating factors also. Perfect. Very good. Now let's move to the third topic. Again, something which I have discussed previously, Shyam sir has discussed previously, we all have been discussing previously. In the last quarter, there was a negative 1.4% growth in private investment. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, you have to understand that there are two types of investments which happen into an economy. One is called private, the other one is called public. Now, public investment in India has been going up quite a lot. 11.8% increase in public investment by this center, 34% increase in public investment by the states, which means the government, be it state or center, is pushing a lot of money into the economy. They do it through infrastructure scheme, they do it through certain forms of, you can say, welfare schemes. The idea is very simple. Public investment by the state and the center is good for the economy. But when it comes to price efficiency, when it comes to revenue efficiency, when it comes to cost effectiveness, is private and public investment the same? Again, asking you a question. If a private sector is investing money and a public sector is investing money, which will be more fiscally prudent or more cost effective or more revenue conscious in that regard? And the answer to that question is very simple. It is going to be the private sector, because the private sector is extremely sensitive, as you said, no, is extremely sensitive to these small indicators. They will always invest into certain areas which they think is economically viable. They will always try to find the most cost effective way of doing it, and therefore private investment is considered important. Private investment creates organic growth in the economy, and with organic growth in the economy, there is GDP growth which is independent of public spending. Meaning, most of the data which we see for quarter-on-quarter GVA or quarter-on-quarter GDP growth could be masked because private sector is contracting the investment, public sector is increasing it. Which means, what is the government of India doing? It is taking money from you and me as taxes, pushing it back into the economy. So this is an inorganic way of development, because they took the money from you and me and then they pushed it back into the economy. So it is our money going back. Private investment is not like that. It is the private, you can say, company's own income which is pushed into the economy, that generates more jobs, that generates more consumption, and that in turn leads to the GDP to go forward. So the government does not have its own money. The government takes it in the form of GST, takes in the form of private income tax, takes in the form of corporate tax. So therefore, taking money from one hand and giving it through the other makes no sense whatsoever. Therefore, private investment needs to be boosted. This is where the finance minister has recently decided that the RBI for the first time has cut interest rates, which is they have made credit cheaper. Now, what you have to understand is what are the factors which generally affect private investment. Important question for GS paper 3 and generally for prelims also, which is what are the factors that basically change the orientation of private investment. Now, the first thing which is always said is consumption. Meaning, if people are spending more money, then the private sector would be happy to spend more money. Simple example. If people are spending more and more money, they want more and more groceries, then obviously you can say Reliance or any other form of grocery chain will try to open more stores because people are trying to spend more and more. Therefore, the people's demand is driving more demand for the private sector, and the private sector now wants to spend more. So it was an organic growth. If people are not demanding too much things, there will be contraction. When contraction will happen, the same amount of stores may be closed or they just remain the same. So the idea is consumption is important. But what the article says is that in India, consumption and private investment has not always correlated with one another. In periods in which household savings was very low and consumption was also very low, private investment was very high. Then how is that the case? The second factor is important, which is called bank credit. Bank credit. The argument which the article says is that if credit is available at a cheaper rate, irrespective of consumption, the private sector is ready to expand. And because now the transactions are mostly electronic and the banking sector does not always need to have savings accounts to back that investment, this is the era where bank credit is actually more important. Private investment is more sensitive to bank credit than to consumption in that area. Now, if you actually look at it, the budget has tried to solve the first issue and the interest cut is trying to solve the second issue. The budget has now made income tax rebate or income tax zero till 12 lakh to 12.75 lakhs, which means that people have more money in their hand. With more disposable income, there will be more consumption. But the private sector said that this is not enough. Therefore, the RBI has said what? The RBI said, okay, we will cut the repo rate, we will cut the bank rate, we will bring down the cost of loans. Therefore, now making bank credit more lucrative. This is where you can see that there is a certain sense of correlation which is happening. For the first time, I would rather say that the government is trying to understand and address each of these issues properly. Previously, there used to be a high-handed approach. We said private investment is good. You have to accept it. We will not do anything about it. You don't have money. That is not my problem. If you are not a middle class, then how are you consuming content on OTT? We have seen this type of comments from the finance minister previously also. What is this so-called, what we call as middle class? The same middle class is also consuming Netflix. So if they have the money for Netflix, so bring down your income in that regard. The idea was that for the first time, they are now understanding that the economy is independent of perception of the government itself. And therein, with people contracting with disposable income contracting, people contracting their demand, there was a slowdown in the economy. And therefore, for the first time, with private investment considered more important than public investment, the government of India is trying to respond in both senses, trying to cut the what we call as interest rates, at the same point of trying to increase the consumption in that regard. This is going to be important. This means that there's a positive correlation between bank credit and public investment, and consumer demand is automatically going to go up with more disposable income. Now, how do you see a question coming in the examination? See, in the examination, you will get a question like this. Private investments in an economy is a function of multiplicity of consumer and bank-driven factors. Meaning you cannot answer this question until and unless you do not understand the concept of what is the consumer side and what is the other side, which is bank-driven side. Consumer side is consumption, which allows for private investment to go up, and bank side is the interest cost of a bank loan, which should be lower. I have already established to you why is a private investment into the economy better than a public investment, because private investment is more organic, it is more systemic, it is more systematized, and it is more cost effective. Public investment leads to leakages also. Public investment also has a lot of chance for corruption to happen, which is also the case in India, because with regards to how tenders are passed, a lot of money is lost in the red tape or these levels of the government also in that regard. The cost of a building being established by a public sector and a private sector is very different, because the public sector will have tenders, will have contractors, will have multiple intermediaries who will produce that building. On the other hand, in India, if a private sector, they will find the most cost-effective way to produce that building. This is a very interesting dichotomy. At the same point of time, when we are seeing investment going up in India, we have a concern, which is private investment is not going up. Are we sorted with regards to this concept? If we are, we'll move to the next topic, which is the concept of the USAID being cut. On the same page with regards to this? Okay, great. Now, Trump doing his magic. This is the second magic trick of Trump. Trump, along with Elon Musk and his new department, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, has targeted one of the most important means of creating soft power for the US in the world, which is called USAID. Now, USAID is a US agency for international development, and this body was developed during the Cold War period. The idea was very simple, that if America funds development, humanitarian support, food security, or tries to, in a way, do humanitarian things across the world, the perception of the US is going to be very, very important. And in Cold War politics, it was important that US is seen as the harbinger of capitalism. Capitalism does welfare, vis-a-vis the USSR, which was seen to be a planned economy, does not spend on welfare, this and that. The idea was very simple. When it was conceived, USAID, it was considered to be a very important tool in defeating communism, socialism as an ideology. Close to 68 to 70 billion dollars is allocated by the US for aid, out of which 45 billion dollars goes to this agency called USAID. Now, USAID in that regard creates a certain good perception of the Americans. Let's be very honest, Americans have enough not going for them. This helps. It has been helping in the West Asian sector, in Vietnam, in the African sector, with regards to Ebola, with regards to what we call as AIDS, with regards to a lot of things. Americans don't have a lot going for them, what they've done in Afghanistan, what they've done in West Asia, what they've done in Iran, what they've done in Iraq, what they've done in the Vietnam sector, what they have done generally to the world in that regard. They have not been a very, very responsible superpower after you can say the defeat of the USSR and the communist ideology. But this is where the soft power angle comes in, US perception. We are doing it. It's again the hypocrisy of the West. They first destroy and then give aid. So the Europeans destroyed the whole of African sector and its economy and its agriculture, and now give money in the form of FAO and saying that, okay, we are doing a favor on you by giving you food. It's a paradoxical understanding, but USAID was important. Now, what Trump has said is that America comes first. I am going to cut the budget of USAID. And it has done that. And or rather, he has done that. His administration, or he has basically cut the budget of USAID by 90%. There are close to 10,000 to 12,000 employees who are overseas as of right now under USAID. He has said that the total number of employees will be 296. He has brought down that $440 billion to now close to $1 billion. Even he is going to go lower than that in that regard. This is Elon Musk trying to cut out the fat. Now, there are two things here. You have to understand the static. You have also to understand what does it have an impact on US generally. So when we talk about the static, first 90 days, the first casualty within the US as an agency is USAID. Musk and Trump both have now reduced the budget of USAID. Now, when was USAID established? It was established by John F. Kennedy during the Cold War era. It used to come under the State Department. Then the Congress made it as an independent agency, and thereafter it has mostly been an independent agency. The idea is that Marco Rubio is controlling the states, the Department of States, which is home department of theirs, basically home affairs. The idea is to take out USAID as an independent agency and merge it with the US Department of States, which is basically merge it as a subsidiary rather than being an independent body. And the idea is USAID has done a lot for the world, Now, what Trump is saying that this lot is also is problematic. See, Trump is saying, my America First policy says, I will not let you have any form of, you can say, this outward looking capacity. No, US comes first. But he's saying that the aid which has been given by the US is also problematic. For example, he says, why is America rather funding a $1.5 million grant or funding an LGBTQ group in Serbia and 2.5 million assistance for electric vehicles being manufactured in Vietnam? He's saying, why are we paying money to Vietnam to have an EV policy? Why are we giving, and he's already removed transgenders from the concept of what we call as women's sports itself. He is homophobic in that regard, and therefore he's saying, why are we funding an LGBTQ campaign? Further, he's saying, and this is the absurdity of Trump's understanding, Trump is saying, see, in the process of stopping AIDS from spreading, contraceptives and condoms are very important, protection. Now, the idea is, he is saying that why is USAID giving a grant or spending $50 million on shipping condoms to Gaza, where he is saying that these same condoms are being used for making bombs. And the data shows us that the only place where ever US has sent any form of contraceptives as a form of controlling AIDS is actually Jordan. Neither Gaza, neither Israel, neither across the Middle East, US is not sending anything. But he's saying they are using these contraceptives as bombs. Again, something he's read off a random website, and now he's creating a perception that this aid is problematic. So he says, I don't have a problem with this soft power understanding. I believe that the aid itself is going in the wrong direction. And this is where USAID is a very important humanitarian, you can say, body, a humanitarian fund in that regard. And in Afghanistan, it is funding children's education, specifically girl child, in the Taliban ruled country itself. In most of what we call as Africa, and in Uganda specifically, this money is being pushed for Ebola welfare. HIV AIDS has always been a program which Bush had started in 2003. And multiple water-based programs are running in South Africa. If you actually look at it, as of right now, the most important thing which the US does through US aid is now the Putin and Trump connection coming through. What it does right now is it buys grains from Ukraine farmers and then sells it to the rest of the world so that there is some form of income in Ukraine. It also boosts famine prevention, and in India, it has worked for health, education, sanitation, and environment. Now, this is a very interesting thing. Putin and Trump are close. Putin does not want Ukraine to sell its grain to the US. If there is economic pressure on the Ukrainian sector, it will then not be able to fund its war. This is where it smells fishy. US aid, as of right now, most important task and most of its personnel are in the Ukrainian sector. They are buying the goods from Ukraine, selling it and giving them back the money. This is where the timing, the connection and the concept becomes problematic. Now, this is going to change the perception of the US for sure. Not that US really does care, but this perceptional understanding is going to be very, very critical and very, very important. This is where Trump maybe is, or rather is already acting with regards to suffocate the Ukrainians for Putin to get a solution out of this war itself. Now, this is where this topic becomes extremely interesting. We don't know, is it really Department of Efficiency and they're trying to cut down the fat, or US aid being impacted is a very specific targeted process to bring a solution or give a favorable outcome for Russia in the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Something which starts as a very small topic but becomes very, very interesting. Now, how do you get a question in the examination? You get a question like this. Trump's America First policy may have an impact, may impact the soft power of the US across the world or the globe. Soft power is perception-based cultural understanding. US aid has always been a harbinger of change. Though this, what we call as budget cut, has been blocked by one of the judges in Washington, D.C., but you can see a trend which is developing. You can see a trend which is developing, which is that America, as of right now, is in the hands of a person. If you and me go and whisper to them that if you give money to India, you will get a lot of money, he will do something in India also. He is in that understanding that he's very finicky with regards to his perception. He does not do research, he does not go by numbers, but goes by rhetoric. And this is where Trump is unpredictable. And he has also referred to the concept of Chabahar recently, and he is now having a certain type of understanding with regards to Iran. And because Chabahar, India has interest, it is not a good thing that he's looking towards a port which India is actually funding. And in that regard, it would lead to a little bit of an issue with regards to what India's role is in Iran in that regard. So Trump's understanding is perception driven, and therefore perception of Chabahar and perception of India is always going to be important. We are seeing also multiple images of the first illegal immigrants from America coming back to India. I don't know if you've seen those videos in which they're saying that we did Dunki and reached till America in 6 months. We paid 50 lakh, 60 lakh rupees. Their hands and legs were tied together. A lot of perception-based understanding. Again, politicization of that issue should not happen. But the idea is Trump, we cannot trust. Same as the last term, same as this term. So I hope all the 4 major topics, or rather 5 major topics, are sorted for all of you. Yes? Perfect. Very good. Moving on. This I have discussed in one of the sessions which I took for art and culture current affairs also. I don't know if you remember, in which I've done the one year whole roundup for art and culture. I discussed the National Mission for Manuscripts. In that, I had told you and proposed to you that the government of India is actually thinking of changing the funding structure of the National Mission for Manuscripts. As we know today that this has happened. 500 crores has been allocated to this new mission, and previously it used to come under the Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts. Now the money is being routed to the Sahitya Academy, And what is interesting is that the finance minister had argued that they are going to start a new scheme, and that scheme is called Gyan Bharatam Mission. Now, we are not sure if Gyan Bharatam Mission is going to be the name of NMM now or henceforth. But the idea is very simple. It has the same target which the finance minister had said on 1st of February. The idea is very simple. This scheme is very, very important. It is now being transformed, is purely going to be a central sector scheme in which all the money is going to be allocated by the center. But most probably they're going to set up an independent special finance committee and an independent body also for doing this, because the Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts has not done a good job. And therefore, a lot of controversy was related to this. And therefore, they are most probably going to change the perception of this scheme, the orientation of this scheme. But the government is still showing a lot of, you can say, interest in doing something like this. So this is where we have an update. 500 crores allocated. Gyan Bharatam scheme could be the new name of NMM, and the money is now being routed through Sahitya Academy. Therefore, the change in administration has already happened in that regard. Okay, now this brings us, simple straightforward topic. This brings us to the last topic for today, which is related to the concept of CO2 cycles and soil. So we know that organic decomposition of, you can say, matter in the soil releases carbon dioxide. But what the new study points out, and this is very important for prelims, is that when a surface is dry, then wet again, then dry, then wet again, then dry, then wet again, meaning if a area, for example, a city which was previously mostly moisture laden or mostly dry, meaning temperature was constant, then the CO2 which comes out of that soil used to be predictable and used to be in a certain scale. But if the same soil gets wet and dry in multiple periods and in cycles, it tends to release more carbon than what it used to. So the argument is from 1 to 3 times more carbon is released if the surface is wet and dry in certain cycles. This means that areas, for example, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, now there used to be dry environment. Now with rain coming through, rain, dry, the same amount of carbon which was released previously will get 3 times more. This is where there's a certain correlation which has come up in organic soil releasing more carbon in cycles of moisture rather than having a constant moisture understanding in that regard. This is again a very interesting thing. Drying and rewetting cycle increase soil CO2 release, not good for global warming. As it is, America doesn't care right now. But we as UPSC aspirants should have an understanding that if the same soil is now going through multiple cycles or seasons, which it did not do previously, it is going to release more carbon in that regard. Okay. Now, before I end the session, we have discussed 7 articles. First, we discussed the understanding of Trump trade wars, national emergency, perception-driven understanding, retaliatory tariff from China, and the idea that it is where Mexico and Canada cartel behavior is being talked about. The second topic we talked about, what is the difference between a freebie and the concept of what is today called as a welfare scheme. That is a very critical concept. Do go through that section because that is going to come in the examination for sure. What is a freebie? What is a welfare concept? Thereafter, we tried to understand USAID and how USAID is now in a way being diluted, is going to impact the soft power of the Americans. We also understood why the government is so keen to bring back private investment in India, because that is a better form of investment. Further, NMM can be now renamed. The money is coming to Sahitya Academy. And last but not the least is carbon dioxide release of soil increases if it is going through wet and dry cycles. Sorted? Thank you. I will see you tomorrow with another set of issues. Today the paper did not have a lot of things which were relevant because of the election. But tomorrow we should have more interesting topics in that regard. Thank you. Take care. Very soon we will come up. Remember, tomorrow is also the date on which Conquer Prelim starts. Chetan sir is going to be with you at 7 p.m. with critical concepts being discussed in a static understanding The second phase of Conquer Prelims starts tomorrow, and I hope that you're excited for that. Thank you, take care, and use the code IAS English to get the course that is also equally important. Thank you, bye-bye, take care.